Okay. The Ministry of Labor, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation has received inquiries from the general public, employers and employees regarding whether the policy of mandatory vaccination may or should be implemented in business enterprises. The ministry has so far received 4 labor-related complaints that emerge from employers introducing mandatory vaccinations at their workplaces, whereas the Labor Commissioner received 10 labor cases. Of the cases referred to the Labor Commissioner, 1 was later withdrawn, 1 was resolved through conciliations, and the complainant has been reinstated, while arbitration proceedings are ongoing for the 8 cases. The 4 complaints were amicably resolved between employers and employees in line with the national COVID-19 guidelines. In light hereof, and in order to provide guidance to the public and both employers and employees, the ministry issues this press release. In this regard, it is to be noted that since April 2021, the Namibian government has been providing COVID-19 vaccinations at no cost nationwide and has been urging people, with some exceptions, to get vaccinated for their own good and for the health of all and for public good. At the same time, government has pronounced that vaccinations against COVID-19 is done on a voluntary basis. Government positions remains the same to date. Therefore, this ministry does not at this juncture advise employers to introduce mandatory vaccinations at workplaces, but advises on the labor aspects of addressing COVID-19 at the workplace that are consistent with the current government position. Section 39 and 40, subsection 1 of the Labor Act of 2007 requires an employer to provide a workplace that is without risk to the health of employees and or to third parties or the public. Some employers rely on these provisions as authorizing the introduction of mandatory vaccination at workplaces. However, such obligation must be implemented in a manner that balances the employer's statutory duty with other obligations under the Labor Act and with the rights and duties of employees. The ministry advises employers to rather educate and encourage their employees on the importance of vaccines and to allow employees to make voluntary decisions. The ministry has developed occupational safety and health COVID-19 guidelines, which outline measures employers can adopt in order to minimize the spread of COVID-19 at workplaces. This, together with the national COVID-19 guidelines, regulations, and protocols available at the ministry's website. In instances where an employer intends to introduce measures aimed at imposing mandatory vaccination, such must be done taking cognizance of the provisions of the Namibian labor law, applicable company policies, rules, as well as contracts of employment. As is the norm in labor matters, introduction of new workplace policy initiatives which affect existing employee rights must only be done after consulting, agreeing with the affected employees, depending on the nature and scope of the policies. In light of the above, extra care is needed when employers consider a policy of mandatory vaccination. They should not introduce such a policy unilaterally, nor rely on Section 39 and 40 in isolation and without reference to the full ambit and context of the Labor Act number 11 of 2007. Company policies and the contract of employment. These include protections against unfair dismissal of employees Failure to do so will create a high potential and risk of labor disputes that might otherwise be avoided. Such disputes, especially when involving a large number of employees or sensitive operations, could prove to be disastrous, time-consuming and expensive, particularly if it later found to be unfair. The negative impact on business operations and staff morale and well-being of workers and their families is equally high during and after such actions are taken. The Office of the Labor Commissioner, under the auspices of the Ministry of Labor, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation, has a mandate to register labor disputes from employees and employers over contraventions, application, interpretation, or enforcement of the Act, and to take appropriate action. The Labor Commissioner is inter alia guided by the following sections of the Labor Act: Section 33, unfair dismissal; Section 34, collective termination; and 48 and 50, unfair labor practices. Employers are advised to take these provisions into account when considering taking action relating to mandatory vaccination at workplaces. The Ministry, in the process of drafting guidelines on the steps that should be taken in order to ensure adherence to the labor and employment laws and norms of social dialogue and fairness in approaching the issue of mandatory vaccinations at the workplace. In accordance with the principles and considerations outlined above, these guidelines will assist employers, trade unions, and employees to agree on approaches that can maximize health considerations while respecting the rights of employees and promoting their well-being and job security. Thank you very much, Branch.